So first, I want to thank all the people that make sure this service happens, which are the volunteers. And so from the folks up in the crow's nest up there that you never see, to Ron, who does the filming on and puts it online, to the worship team that blesses us with their gifts and graces, to the ushers and greeters and the Hubbards who come super early to set up. And these are just a smattering of all the volunteers that make this church happen on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year basis. And we are a community of faith that works because of the many hands that give to and ensure that we continue to follow the way of Christ and discern the Spirit. And so look around to your neighbor and say, thank you. Okay, now look at another neighbor and say, thank you. Because each of you are a gift to each other and to us, and so thank you for being here today. In front of you is a blue prayer card. If you have any prayer requests, fill that out, and later in the service you can put it in the offering plate or in the calabash up in the front. And so I invite you to pray as we invite the Spirit of God to dance among us. Our God, we are thankful today because you are the one who is here present. You're the one that's invited us to be present to you and to each other. And we are excited because you're the one that is at work within us. Take us as we are. Shape and mold us as you dream of us to be. And allow us to be filled by your spirits with ears that might hear this day. For it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. So growing up, one of my best friends' name was Timmy. And Timmy had the coolest house of any house in all of Baltimore. Primarily for two reasons. Number one was that Timmy's house had a bomb shelter from World War II underneath of it. And so that was our fort, a bomb shelter with old cans and all that cool stuff. And the other really cool part was that he was being raised by a single dad who had no rules. That's not true. He had one rule: don't hurt each other. But when you're a kid and you have a house that you can do whatever you want and they have a bomb shelter, it is amazing. Well, Timmy was this creative guy that was always looking for ways to have fun, if you will. And one day on the playground, he invited us to gather around. Remember those old horses that were on springs that you would go back and forth? We were having races to see who could finish first. And he said, you guys have to come over on Saturday morning to my house and bring your shovels. I have found something that will change our lives. And so because Timmy invited us and because it was his house and there were shovels involved, we all showed up Saturday morning at Timmy's house, shovels in hand and the toys from the beach, because we needed buckets. And we went into the woods for the whole entire day, digging and collecting and filling buckets full of all of these rocks. And all the time we were talking about how we were the luckiest kids in the world because we had found what would make us rich forevermore. We would never have to work. We don't have to worry about college. And we could even help our parents by buying them homes. We went back to the house, and Timmy's dad said, where have you guys been all day? And we said, out in the woods, collecting. And look what we found. We have found gold. And we began to tell him all of our dreams and aspirations of the gold and the buckets of gold that we had. And he smiled and listened to our stories. And after a while, he finally said, what you found, boys, is pyrite. And pyrite is amazing. But pyrite is not gold. In fact, the nickname for pyrite is fool's gold. It looks just like the real thing, but isn't. And with that, all of our dreams at the ripe age of 10 were crushed forevermore. We never found the riches of gold in the woods, but we had this illusion of what we thought everyone else had always missed. They'd walked right past the gold and left it for us to discover. Well, today we begin this new sermon series called Called. And what we often find in our lives is that we think we're learning something for the very first time, and you start telling other people, and they're like, yeah, welcome to the club. And sometimes what we discover in this process is that what we think we found that's of great worth isn't. And sometimes we end up finding out is of the greatest of worth. And so this invitation to be called by God is the greatest value of anything that you can grasp in your life. Because being called by God is an invitation to become who God has called you to be. I think there's something interesting that ecclesiastical writer wrote about there's nothing new under the sun. That sometimes what I think is a discovery, I soon to find out that others already knew, and they're like, you just found out? I'm a bit slow. I don't know if you knew that. And maybe some of you are with me in that, but the ecclesiastical writer paints this picture that there's nothing new under the sun, and ends up writing this story about my life and my life is fleeting. It's momentary. In the cosmos time, we are a mist that happens in a moment in time. And so what is the purpose of your life? Why do we toil under the sun all the days of our lives? And so we can chase after things like love, but does it bring meaning? We can chase after things like wealth, but does it bring meaning? We can chase after things like pleasure, but does it bring meaning? We can even chase wisdom, but does it bring meaning? So for the next 5 weeks, we're going to explore what it means to be called by God, to find those deeper questions that we have and how they might be asked. When we start asking the right questions, we start paying attention for the answers. And for 5 weeks, we're going to have 5 questions that guide our conversation. You ready for this? At the end of service, we have a quiz. You're not allowed to get a donut until you answer it correctly. Number 1, what is my purpose in life? Everybody say it. Number 2, will God audibly tell me what to do? Will God tell me audibly what to do? What will it cost me? What if I'm not capable of doing what I'm called to do? And what roadblocks impede my path? I'm so excited that you're as excited as I am about this. The energy level was like way up here. So hopefully by the end of 5 weeks, you'll be like, I have a whole new lease on life. I'm so excited. Let's go do something great for the world, right? And so today we start with, what is my purpose in life? Early in my life, I thought only young people had this question. And so when you're in your 20s, you begin the journey of trying to figure out, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I'm growing up, and my parents are giving me the boot, right? And I've got to learn how to fly all on my own. And so what is my purpose in life? And then some of us are crazy enough to get married and then have kids. And you begin to ask, what is my purpose in life in a whole new way? Because for some reason, God gave you these beings to take care of. And then I've heard, I'm a long way from it, but those kids will leave the house. And suddenly, after decades of raising kids, there's no more around you. In fact, they don't even call you anymore. And you begin to question, what is my purpose now in my life? And then you face that horizon that you have planned for your whole life long called retirement. When that which you've done for 40 years is no longer, and suddenly you have all this time on your hands, and you begin to ask a new question. What is the purpose of my life? And I found out from an 81-year-old a couple weeks ago that she came to me and said, I'm trying to figure out the purpose in my life. And the 105-year-old that comes to the 9 o'clock service that sleeps through every sermon, she woke up for this point and nodded her head yes and went back to sleep. She's still trying to find out her purpose in life. So to give you hope, if you don't know it, it's okay. But through this journey, we want to find out, what is the purpose of my life? So out of a quick poll, how many of you have ever asked yourself, what is the purpose of my life? Anyone? Okay, most of you. And what I've discovered is that we often start with that as the primary question of what is the purpose of my life, and we forget to ask a previous question that's more important. Why do you exist? Why do you exist? In the fleeting moment of time, why are you here? What difference does your one and only life make in the cosmos and in God's kingdom? And until you can answer the question of why you exist, it's hard to find your purpose. Instead, what ends up happening is we get on that hamster wheel where we run as fast as we can and then realize that we haven't actually moved at all. And so we run after careers, and we run after success, and we run after pleasure, and all these things that the ecclesiastical writer told us that it's all meaningless. Because it's all meaningless until we understand why we are here. So we turn these ancient scriptures to this man named Jesus who has these profound statements throughout these scriptures about our meaning and purpose in life. And what he's inviting us to do is to begin to see in a new way our purpose and meaning in life by answering the deepest of questions of why do you exist? So you ready for it? Why do you exist? You exist to be loved and to love. You exist to be loved and to love. It's the essence of everything else. And until you understand that, all of it other stuff doesn't really matter. And so this is the way that Jesus says it. He says it better than I do. You must love the Lord your God with all of your hearts and with all of your being and with all of your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. You must love your neighbor as you love yourself. And then listen to this. All of the law and the prophets depend on these two commands. Everything else in this entire world depends on the law of love. And so if you ever go into our sanctuary, up on the wall, we proudly share our motto to the world around, which says, Love never faileth. In modern English, love never fails. It's the message that we try to proclaim every single week. That this is the message of God to each of us. That God's love won't fail us. And because God's love won't fail us, God fills us with that same love so that we can share it with each other. So to figure out the purpose of your life, you first got to figure out the love issue. And can you embrace being loved by God, warts and all? And can you love your neighbor as yourself? And out of that comes purpose. The stage of life that I'm in is I'm in my early 40s. I have 3 amazing kids. One's a teenager. He's not here, so I can say that. The purpose of my life right now is to be a dad. To parent and shepherd my kids so that they can grow and become amazing people that bless the world. I hope I don't mess them up too bad that therapy doesn't cost a lot of money later. Right? My other purpose is to be a minister at Central Union Church. I know that there will be a day where that day comes to a close and God calls me to something else. I hope it's a long time from now. But for now, this is where my home is. This is where God has called me, as well as Pastor Brandon. We've installed him with deadbolt locks, so he can't leave. And what we believe is that God has called us to be present to this moment of time. And the purpose of our being called to this present moment in time is to teach my kids the way of love and hope that we can do life together in such a way that we teach each other the way of love. That is my purpose. That is why I exist, to love and to be loved. And to help others get that message and do it in their own lives. Now, it sounds incredibly easy, and we talk about this all the time. It's not easy to love, is it? If it was easy to love, we would never have war or famine or pain or strife or anything else. But we keep on striving to live into this way of love. And so as you're seeking your purpose in life, hear these words of Frederick Buechner when he says this: the place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. And when you get that, you are a person living on purpose and for purpose to bless the world with love that flows out of you and changes the lives around you. And when you do it, it is effortless. It is joyous. It is freeing. It is something that others gravitate towards because they want a taste of it themselves. So I want to tell you a story of a friend of mine who was a minister on the mainland, and he was one who had great aspirations. He's an American. He wanted to be incredibly successful. He wanted to lead a mega church, and a mega church is 2,000 plus members. And so he began his ministry by preaching like crazy, telling the congregation they had to invite more people to the church so they could grow the church, and all very spiritualizing sounding stuff. But the root of it was that he wanted to be successful. And he wrapped it in the story of God calling him to full-time ministry, and that God had called him to be a great preacher, And so he tried to fine-tune his craft. And so every opportunity he had, he would never say no to anything because it was an opportunity to help things grow. And so one day, a funeral director down the street from his church called him and said, "We have someone that passed away, and we need a minister to officiate. Would you be willing to officiate?" Immediately he said yes, because in his mind, if I preach a good sermon at the funeral, those people that are in the pews will come to my church. So he went to the funeral home to meet with the family and got there and met with the funeral director and said, "Where's the family?" And he said, "I don't know. I don't think he had any family." He goes, "Well, what am I supposed to do?" And he said, "That's why I called you. You're a minister. Can you officiate?" And so here's a man that he never had met, doesn't know anything about. No one has any history on this person. And he went home and began to craft a sermon to talk about this one who was loved by God, a child of God's own redeeming, a son of God's own flock, and began to write this amazing sermon to preach and to tell people the story of life unfolded in a man he had never met. And so the morning came, a Friday morning, and he showed up to the funeral home a half hour early, and nobody was there except for him and the funeral director. As they sat, he prayed for this one who had died and asked for God's mercy and blessing on this one. And suddenly the hour came that the service was to begin, and there's nobody there. Minutes went by, and no one was coming to the service. All that was there was a casket with the deceased in it, the funeral director, and the minister. And the funeral director said, "That's the easiest service I've ever done," and began to close the caskets. And the minister said, "No, I want you to sit in the front pew and let us honor this one and the God who loved him." And so they began to sing the hymns of faith. He preached the sermon, the best sermon he ever had, to the funeral director. He prayed for those that may not have known this one had died, and asked for God to lift him into place eternal, to the place with all the companies of saints who dwell in everlasting light. He said it was on that day that he became a minister, because it was no longer chasing success or a big church. It was learning how to love, and to love someone that could give nothing in return. He never became a mega church pastor. In fact, his church is about 400 people, but he loves them deeply. In each of our lives, we're invited to discern God's invitation to us of what is our purpose in this world. If it's not rooted in the story of God's love that's been shared with you and is now flowing through you out into the world at large, then maybe today is a time to slow down and ask some deeper questions. Why do you exist? And what is your purpose? May you discern it well in these days ahead, so that you may hear God's call to each of you, inviting you to follow and to be God's blessing to this world around. May it be so among us. Amen.